Hi, it's Sally-Shakti. This is my fast walk before lunch, and I'm reflecting on day 2 of my Writing Retreat Facilitator Training with Rowena Murray. Today's a more practical day. Everyone has a chance to practice an aspect of the retreat facilitation. My turn will be after lunch. And then we get to, feedback to each other and learn from each other as well. So I haven't had my turn yet, but what I noticed and what I want to reflect on so far from today's session is that writing really, for me, puts me into a different state of consciousness. It's not, when I move into writing, especially when I'm immersed in a writing practice for a sustained period of time, puts me into a different level of consciousness than everyday consciousness. And actually I was reflecting on this aspect last night in my journaling, so it's quite present at the forefront of my mind, recommitting to my own writing as a practice, as a behaviour and as a ritual. So I was journaling last night, and I found that very powerful. I got into some deep places very quickly and was able to really shift and move and transform some stuck energies that had been with me for quite some time, and really just reminding myself what an alchemical process it is and practice it is to put words down on the page and to be present with myself on the page in that way. Yesterday I spoke about my poetry as a form of ritual, but even just any form of writing, any form of meeting myself on the page really is a ritual practice for me. It's magical and alchemical, and it's where I can really witness myself and be present with who I am, what's coming up for me, the shadow aspects that the shadow aspects that I try to keep hidden get an opportunity to be seen and witnessed and loved and incorporated, or healed and released, whatever it is that they need, or maybe that's the same thing, because they're not being rejected and suppressed and hidden anymore. So as I was writing and reflecting in my journal last night, I was reflecting on the different levels of consciousness that writing can put me into, and this is quite basic, really quite. It's rough and rudimentary. It's not. I'm sure that this could be explored in a much more nuanced way, but. Just the kind of, if I thought about 3 basic levels of consciousness, writing often can take me and other people that I've worked with into a deep dive into the subconscious or unconscious quite quickly. We can reach some very deep places for catharsis and healing. I witnessed that very profoundly in the writing workshop that I did with Navanita here at Osho Leela last week on Thursday evening. We'll talk more about that in another video at some point. So writing can very quickly and easily take me and others I've worked with into a deep dive into the unconscious or subconscious, or I've used journaling, I've worked with journaling and experienced journaling as a way to bring my unconscious behavior patterns and beliefs to the surface and move them out of my body and my energy field onto the page. And whilst I was doing my PhD, let's just go back up a minute. So then the next level of consciousness for me is everyday consciousness, which is not quite the level of consciousness that I'm in when I'm writing. Maybe that's more the level of consciousness that's required for editing and analysis and critical thinking, or forms of writing that are more structured, more linear, I think it is that level of editing and analysis that goes into a writing process, that maybe is closer to the everyday level of consciousness, everyday consciousness. But then there's another level of consciousness which doesn't get really talked about very much, and it's the level of consciousness that I go to in my poetry, and that Ernst Bloch wrote about. He's the primary philosopher that I was studying when I was writing my PhD, because he wrote about utopia. He had a utopian philosophy, and what I got from that, among many other things, was what he spoke about as an opposite and even an antidote to Freud's subconscious. He spoke about the not yet conscious, or he wrote about the not yet conscious, and he talks about this in terms of hope and the concept of utopia and what does not yet exist in our world, and what can we not even yet really think of or conceptualize, and how we bring that into reality. And as I say that, this opens up a lot more room for discussion that I would love to talk about more, and will do, because it's one of my favourite things to talk about in terms of writing. So Bloch posited the idea of the not yet conscious, what does not yet exist in our world, that we get to bring in and call in through our aesthetic practice. And for me, it's through writing practice. How writing practice, particularly the way that I work in my poetry, my utopian poetics, is about creating that space for new possibilities and opening up the potential for new realities that don't yet exist, but that I believe through my practice it's possible to, in some ways, I think, I don't want to put too much emphasis on this aspect of kind of receiving that idea. It's not as if the narrative is already written. I believe that we're participating, and I'm participating in creating that new possibility as the idea arrives, and certainly as it filters down through different levels and layers of consciousness and energies, as it moves into my energy field and through my body to take form in the material world. As the idea is kind of maybe floating around here in infinite possibility, it's a blank page. Everything's possible, but it's not potent. It doesn't have the potency of potential. As it filters down through my energy field and into the more grosser forms into my physical body, and I can write it, and it then takes form in the physical world, I've become part of participating in creating that idea as well. Not fully. I haven't shaped exactly what form it will take and what it will become for everyone, but I've participated in the creation of that. And I guess I'm mentioning that because it's important for me to stress that for me it's not an idea that there's a fully formed godlike narrative out there that I'm just waiting to receive. and bring in. It's really about participating in the co-creation of those new possibilities. And I think we've gone a little bit abstract and off topic here, but what I really wanted to talk about was those different levels of consciousness that writing can take me into, especially in a sustained writing period. So I move and shift out of my everyday consciousness into a writing consciousness, which might be a deep dive into my subconscious, or it might be a form of receiving new ideas and participating in new possibilities through what Bloch called the not yet conscious. And where I wanted to go with that specifically in terms of facilitating a writing retreat is that that state of consciousness is very much like, similar to, a meditative state of consciousness for me. And I guess this brings me right back to where I started my PhD, because my practice inquiry was whilst I was reading Dictate by Teresa Hat-Kyung Cha, which put me into a meditative state. My inquiry was, how can I create writing that invites and encourages and invokes and performs a meditative experience, rather than actually writing about and describing a meditation? How can I create writing that performs meditation and opens up the possibility of a meditative state of consciousness? And those states of consciousness that I experience whilst I'm writing are very much like a meditative state of consciousness for me. Very, very similar. And where that brings me back to the beginning of this conversation, this video, is in terms of facilitating a writing retreat. One thing that I have become really mindful of through today's training session is supporting those transitions into and out of writing, because especially the coming back out, it's really important to support that process gently, to give time frames, like 5 minutes, 1 minute, allowing people to prepare, really in a way I think that supports them to bring their consciousness gently and gradually back into the reality of everyday consciousness. Because in my experience, like I've said, that's actually not the level of consciousness that I'm in when I'm moving through a sustained piece of writing or a sustained writing practice. So managing those transitions into and out of writing practice for me actually is very important, because it's important to support people gently into and out of those alternative and altered and different states of consciousness that we experience through writing, and to support people to come back gently with guided invitations into that. And then of course to bring in some of those aspects that I'm familiar with from yoga and meditation practices, like deepening the breath, beginning to stretch and move the body, and just bringing the awareness back into the room and back into the body and back into the self, back into the everyday reality. And I think it's important to do that in a really supportive and managed way, so that I'm not just bringing people, snapping people out of a very deep state of consciousness into an everyday state of consciousness in which it's more difficult to navigate the world, because perhaps that person may be, if they haven't been supported through a transition process, maybe feel slightly disembodied, disorientated, and that can be quite a shock to the system. So yeah, I'm interested in that. I'm excited about that because it's another way of integrating the practices that are so important to me, and contemplating how I will flavour my own style of writing retreats. So that's enough talking from me. We did quite a little deep dive there in the middle, and it's nearly lunchtime, so best get faster with my walk, and I'll see you all again soon. Sending you lots and lots of love.